Our next guest is the director and the star of a new highly acclaimed documentary entitled Supersize Me. It opens tomorrow in selected cities. Please say hello to Morgan Spurlock.
The network premiere of Morgan Spurlock's Oscar-nominated film.
We're talking about a movie right now with a filmmaker that you probably know, Morgan Spurlock. He would hope certainly that you've seen him on TV, heard him on the radio, and seen him in his movie. The one I think about, of course, doesn't everyone say this, is Supersize Me.
Size it up. Supersize Me.
We all remember watching Supersize Me in school, right? Supersize Me was a monumental documentary released in 2004 by Morgan Spurlock. The documentary is about his personal journey eating nothing but McDonald's for 30 days when he was previously on a much healthier and near-vegetarian diet. The film received widespread attention and is often cited as the reason that McDonald's discontinued serving supersized portions, as they discontinued them 6 weeks after the film premiered. This film was a pretty big deal, and I say was because in the 20 years since it came out, there's been a lot of controversy about it. In this video, we're going to go over the documentary, see what Morgan Spurlock did right, what he did wrong, and if the conclusions reached by the documentary are still in line with what health experts say today. I'm not going to go over every single factor interview, because a lot of them are with health experts who say stuff like getting diabetes is bad because on average it decreases life expectancy, because yeah, you don't need me to confirm that one for you. We're also going to look into the criticism the film received and the various ways its reputation has been tarnished through revelations made about Spurlock. This video is probably going to be very long, so I'll have timestamps in the description if you want to skip to certain parts. I'll also have the sources I used throughout the video listed in the description. With all that out of the way, let's get into the documentary. The movie starts with a clip of kids singing about fast food companies and then talks about some statistics for the time. In 2004, 60% of the US was overweight or obese, with 400,000 deaths per year being attributed to it, making it second only to smoking in terms of mortality. Spurlock then mentions a lawsuit happening at the time in which 2 New York teenagers sued McDonald's, claiming that they were responsible for their weight, something that many people find ridiculous since everyone knows that fast food isn't good for them, right? He then mentions how this is what inspired him to see if that's really true, so he's going to eat nothing but McDonald's for 30 days to see what happens. The intro credits roll to Fat Bottom Girls by Queen. Okay. Before starting his diet, Spurlock goes to 3 different doctors, a cardiologist, a gastroenterologist, and a general practitioner. All 3 ask him questions about his current health and family health history, including that despite his grandfather's having had open heart surgery, he actually doesn't seem to have a lot of predispositions to negative health conditions. When questioned about taking drugs, Spurlock says no. He also says that he used to smoke but no longer does. Good on him for quitting. But when asked if he drinks or not, Spurlock says that he currently doesn't drink. This will be important for later. Spurlock then undergoes several health examinations, including a rectal exam in order to be thorough. All of them show that he's in pretty good health. 168 cholesterol, low blood sugar, and low body fat. One thing weird that I noticed is that the doctors only really mention issues with his triglycerides and cholesterol, aka the ones dealing with excess amounts of lipids that Spurlock will be eating throughout the diet. They don't mention blood sugar much or how it'll be affected by the amount of excess carbs that he'll be eating, which I think would be pretty important to disclose because spiking your blood sugar leads to you feeling hungrier and increases your risk for diabetes. However, they might be more concerned with triglycerides since research suggests that refined carbohydrates also increase triglyceride levels and have a similar, or even worse, impact on heart health compared to saturated fats. After meeting with the doctors, he goes to a health center to talk with a dietitian who will be helping him track his diet. At 6'2" and 185.5 pounds, Spurlock needs 2,500 calories a day and should consume 80 grams of fat per day, with only 25 grams coming from saturated fats. He goes through yet another physical, where he does various exercises to check his physical fitness, along with additional measurements such as body fat, which is initially 11%. Spurlock is considered to be above average in fitness for his age, but that's not going to be true for long, as Spurlock has additional rules in place for the challenge that will keep him in line with the unhealthy habits of many Americans. First rule, Spurlock is going to try and walk a maximum of 5,000 steps a day, as that was the recommendation of Mark Fenton, a former editor of a walking magazine. He didn't recommend walking only 5,000 steps a day for health. He just said that if you wanted to feel like a lot of Americans who don't walk or bike to work and have an office job, you should limit your steps to that. Spurlock's reasoning for this is that according to him, more than 60% of Americans get no form of exercise, which I checked, and in a paper by the CDC in 2003, which was based on data from the National Health Interview Survey in 2000, only 19% of adults engaged in a high amount of physical activity and 23.5% engaged in medium-high levels of physical activity, meaning about 57.5% of the US population engaged in less physical activity than that. That's not more than 60%, and it's also not mentioning that another 32.1% of Americans are engaged in a medium level of physical activity. The number engaged in little to no physical activity was 25%. According to a 2003 NBC article, I did find that in 2001, a phone survey was also done by the CDC, showing that 55% of Americans didn't get the recommended amount of exercise, and in 2000 it was worse than that at 74%. I'm not really sure where Spurlock gets his numbers since he doesn't cite his sources in the documentary. The next few rules are pretty simple. Rule 2. Spurlock can only eat at McDonald's. If it's not on the menu, he can't have it. That includes bottled water as well. Rule number 3. Spurlock needs to eat at McDonald's for 3 meals a day, a minimum of 90 total meals for this experiment. Rule 4. He's got to eat everything on the menu at least once. The last rule Spurlock places on himself is that if an employee asks him to supersize his meal, he's got to supersize it, otherwise he won't. With one last meal by his vegan chef girlfriend, Spurlock begins the experiment. His first meal is an Egg McMuffin value meal. Throughout the film, Spurlock interviews various people, sometimes multiple times. One of the most prominent interviewees is John F. Banzhaf III, who is advising many of the lawyers suing McDonald's on behalf of the 2 teenagers previously mentioned. Many people who Spurlock interviews on the street brought up personal choice and thought that the lawsuit was ridiculous, but Spurlock counters in the documentary by saying that Banzhaf sued big tobacco companies when everyone thought it was ridiculous, and he ended up winning. Banzhaf argues that it is the fast food companies that play a big role in the growing obesity crisis, and while I do think he's absolutely correct in that, he makes a really weird argument that I hope was not repeated in the actual court case by the lawyers he was advising. He states that the growth in obesity can't be because of eating at local restaurants or eating at home, because we've been doing that for hundreds of years in the former and forever in the latter. This is kind of a stupid argument, however, because many local restaurants serve food that can be just as unhealthy or even more unhealthy than fast food places. Of course, sit-down restaurants are eaten more on special occasions, while fast food is designed for convenience and thus eaten more, but with people eating out more in general, that's probably not going to be provable in court. Not to mention that the food we eat at home has gotten worse for us, adding sugar to everything, the influx of ready-made pizzas and other unhealthy meals, the ton of ultra-processed foods we eat on a daily basis is probably an even bigger contributor to obesity for most Americans. So, while I agree that these fast food companies are partly responsible and frankly collaborate with the larger food industry to sell us stuff that makes us unhealthy and shifting the blame away from them, it really doesn't seem like that argument would have held up in court. He does, however, make a good argument in that McDonald's targets young children with the play places and the birthday parties and the fact that their mascot is a magical clown. Many places don't have great playgrounds, and I was actually talking to a friend about this, and he mentioned that when he was growing up, his parents would often take him to McDonald's because he wanted to go to the play area, and eating there was an added bonus for him, so it seems to have worked in many cases. Spurlock also has a short conversation with Samuel Hirsch, who's representing the 2 teenagers in court. And by short, I mean the segment is like 10 seconds long, and kinda makes Hirsch look like an asshole. They even cut him off like mid-sentence, so that the former US Surgeon General David Satcher can talk. It's weird. It does not do Hirsch any favors for those thinking he's just doing it for money. Like, look at this.
Why are you suing the fast food establishment?
You mean motives besides monetary compensation? You mean you want to hear a noble cause? Is that it?
I think that fast foods are a major contributor to this epidemic.
Why was it edited like that? Anyways, Health experts like Satcher and Lisa Young here also state that a big reason for the obesity crisis is just the sheer amount that people are eating, with serving sizes at fast food companies being way bigger than they used to be, and the portions of meats and foods made of refined carbs being way above the average portion size. I really don't like the portion sizes she uses as examples though. Like, she says the average steak you get at a restaurant is like 4 to 5 times the typical serving of meat, but when she puts them side by side, the steak does not look 4 times as big as the deck of cards that she used as a stand-in for a serving of meat. She also says the same thing with the bagels and the slices of bread, saying that a bagel is 4 to 5 times the serving of a slice of bread, and it really doesn't look like it is. However, it turns out she really is telling the truth, because looking up the calorie count of a slice of white bread, I see that it's around 60 calories and 13 grams of carbs, while a bagel is 270 calories and 53 grams of carbs. So yeah, it's between 4 to 5 times the serving size of a slice of bread. They obviously differ from brand to brand, but you can see they generally follow this trend. The bread, the way that it's spread, just looks like it's way more food than the bagel she's comparing it to. Day 2 is when Spurlock gets his first supersized meal. It doesn't go well for him. By day 3, Spurlock's dick feels weird. He talks about it with his gastroenterologist about it, who thinks it might be due to the caffeine from all the soda he's been drinking recently. Former Surgeon General Satcher mentions that if left untreated, obesity will soon become the leading cause of preventable death in the US, overtaking cigarettes. Spurlock also talks to Jacob Solon, the senior editor of Reason magazine, a libertarian publication. I don't get why this interview is here. It's just Solon wondering when it will be socially acceptable to tell off fat people for being fat. Now, Solon isn't advocating for fat people to be publicly shamed. At the beginning of the segment, he recalls a smoker being heckled and mentioned how the smoker got defensive instead of just saying to fuck off, and uses that story to segue into the fat people being heckled thing. So, doesn't believe that one or the other should be harassed. I just don't get why he's here, since he's not a health expert. He's not even talking about the McDonald's lawsuit as some sort of counterpoint or opposing view to the lawyers suing them, which, as an editor of a libertarian magazine, would make sense as to why he's being interviewed. He's probably opposed to it because of the personal responsibility thing and all that. It just doesn't add anything. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, people make fun of fat people all the time. Like, it's a very common punchline. So even though fat people don't get heckled for being fat like he described, they still get harassed. Is this segment just here and edited in such a way to make it seem like confronting fat people for being fat should be socially acceptable? Well, see if the remainder of the film makes that seem like the goal or not. The film cuts back to another interview with Banzaf at McDonald's, where he tells Spurlock about how companies often try to imprint on children to get them to be loyal customers later on in life, citing an experiment involving toy cigarettes. This segment feels like some kind of response to the argument of personal responsibility, saying that these companies use deceptive practices towards children to affect their decision-making when they get older and need to make these choices for themselves, but again, that kind of segment wasn't put in beforehand. Spurlock then plays in the McDonald's playground. Spurlock then shows footage of a talk by Tommy Thompson, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, followed by a talk with William Klisch, the head of medicine at Texas Children's Hospital, who says that obese children often show scarring of the liver, meaning that they could end up with liver failure as adults if they don't change their eating habits. Afterwards, they interview a 16-year-old Caitlin, who talks about current beauty standards for teenage girls and young women, how they tend to trend in the opposite direction of the obesity crisis, putting additional mental strain on them along with all the other difficulties that obese teenage girls and young women face. They then cut to Jared Fogle. Yeah, just Jared Fogle talking to a bunch of children, signing autographs, being told he's a real inspiration to the kids. I'm sure he loved hearing that. Anyways, one of the teenagers who talked to Jared remarked that it was nice talking to someone who went through a similar experience to her, that she doesn't have access to Subway every day, so it doesn't really help her. Dude was only good for optics, and he couldn't even keep that going. Moving on. On day 5, Spurlock goes to meet up with his nutritionist, who finds that he's eating almost 5,000 calories every day, and recommends for him to minimize the amount of food he eats per meal. She recommends getting the yogurt instead of the hot fudge sundae, but Spurlock points out that it's only the small size that has less calories. If you get the regular size with granola, it's actually more calories than the hot fudge sundae. It's a little weird to compare the bigger item with the added toppings and complain that it has more calories than the small sundaes, but I get the point. Is if you order a yogurt at McDonald's, you're probably going to get what you perceive as the regular size, meaning you'll be eating more calories than you realize. At his first weigh-in, Spurlock now weighs 194 pounds. He then interviews some people on the street, and one of them sounds like Patrick Bateman, so I don't trust him.
I get the number 2, the cheeseburger.
The 2 cheeseburger
with
meal.
the supersized Coke and fries.
Courtney, you're gonna have the peanut butter soup with smoked duck and mashed squash. New York Matinee called it a playful but mysterious little dish. You'll love it.
By day 9, we see that Spurlock is eating another double quarter pounder with cheese, despite the fact that he's already had it once, which is a weird thing you're going to see in this documentary. Spurlock consistently eats the really hefty food items, even after trying them once already as per the rules. In fact, day 9 is the day he also finishes eating every item on the menu. He probably should have gone with just a single patty this time, because afterwards Spurlock confides to the camera that he's been feeling depressed despite nothing going wrong that day. Spurlock also says that he feels like he's getting addicted to the food. He eats some and then a bit later once more, which kind of explains eating such big items. Maybe. He would still probably satisfy the cravings with just a regular sized meal though. He's not getting a lot of offers to supersize his meals. They then interview Don Gorski. This dude ate 19,000 Big Macs at the time of filming this. He's now 70 years old. He's still doing it. Gorski has eaten 34,000 Big Macs as of 2024, a feat he attributes to pure OCD, not a joke by the way. He doesn't have any health problems, probably because he eats the 2 Big Macs a day and that's most of his food for the day. He also walks a few miles every day for good measure. He even has below average cholesterol. He's just vibing. Good for him. Good for him, man. The film then cuts back to an interview with one of the previous guys who mentions that the average child in the US sees 10,000 food advertisements per year on TV, most of which are for fast food, sugary cereals, and candy. To see how this affects the youth, Spurlock decides to show a bunch of first graders pictures of George Washington and Jesus. Most of the kids actually had some idea of who George Washington was, but had no clue who Jesus was, which is probably the case in many non-Christian households. One of the kids thought that he was George W. Bush, something which I would not blame Christians for thinking is heresy for war crime-related reasons. The kids didn't really recognize the Wendy's mascot that well, though they all seemed to recognize Ronald McDonald through their advertising. This is a pretty good thing to note. Advertising has a real effect on people, especially with what kids consume. Just look at the Got Milk campaign, which is a really weird campaign in hindsight. The US government just bought advertisements to tell us to drink milk, a beverage that many people don't even think is socially acceptable to drink in public. Day 10, Spurlock eats a salad for at least the second time, because he claimed to have eaten everything on the menu the day before, so that would include the salad. He is also having a nice yogurt with granola, an item that he mentioned has more calories than the hot fudge sundae. Why is he eating this? Guess he had to balance it out because of the salad. This is also in addition to his massive soda. Then we get into an interesting segment. Spurlock goes to a bunch of McDonald's restaurants to find the ever-elusive nutritional facts. Spurlock is doing this because, according to the US government, as of 2000, over half of US households didn't have internet, so the facts being available online was actually a barrier of entry at the time. So Spurlock went into various McDonald's in Manhattan, with only half of them having the health information on posters or flyers on the wall. Only some had take-home charts, and a quarter of them had no health information at all. Banzef even went with Spurlock to a franchise in Washington where they found that the nutrition info was behind a cardboard stand. Afterwards, Banzef argues that part of the issue with McDonald's is that you need to make informed decisions, but in order to do so, you need to be, well, informed. Many McDonald's restaurants don't have this information easily available because if it were, people might eat less of their stuff. Spurlock then goes for his first blood test and meets with his nutritionist again, who tells him that he's still eating twice the amount of calories he needs and recommends getting rid of all the liquid calories he drinks from sodas. Advice he will not abide by the way. At a second weigh-in, he's at 203 pounds, a 17-pound increase. Spurlock then heads to Madison Junior High School in Illinois to talk to some of the staff about the food choices of the kids. They showed that a lot of the kids have some ridiculous lunches, like a lunch of a cookie and french fries. Spurlock mentions that a lot of schools turn a blind eye to this, as they usually assume that when kids buy only the unhealthy items from them, that they brought something else from home that's healthier to eat. He then talks to Barbara Brown, a representative of Sodexo, which handles giving lunches to over 400 schools. Spurlock then goes to a school in West Virginia, which is on the federal school lunch program. The USDA sends food to the school, and most of it is reheated for students. 6 out of 36 meals that month are cooked in the school kitchen. Spurlock then shows clips from Appleton Central Alternative High School, a high school for troubled youth, as the students have truancy and behavioral issues. The school is partnered with Natural Ovens, a private healthy lunch provider. They also got rid of vending and soda machines. The school staff have had a very good experience with the program, as students are more attentive, behavioral problems are down, which is pretty wild considering that this is a school for behaviorally challenged kids. And Spurlock says that this school lunch program costs the same as pretty much any other program, and asks, why can't we do this for every other public school? Founder of Natural Ovens Bakery says it's because of resistance by junk food companies, which may be true in part, but I think there's a much bigger issue at hand here, and that's scale. If you've seen the John Oliver episode on school lunch, you'll already be familiar with the problem. School lunches are subsidized by the government, but schools are only provided about $4 per meal, and that money needs to cover food, employee salaries, and the cost of maintaining equipment. Thank you for citing your sources, John. I've had issues with some people not doing that before. The issue then becomes very apparent. Appleton only has 2 cooks, one of them being part-time, so they don't have to pay as much in terms of staff. Natural Ovens also sponsored the creation of a kitchen in the cafeteria, cutting the cost of that as well. They also only have 120 students, meaning they don't have to spend nearly as much time or have as much equipment to prepare school lunches when compared to a standard public high school. My high school had about 2,400 students. Even if only a quarter of them bought school lunches, which is being real generous since in 2022, over 60% of all public school students received a free or reduced price lunch through the National Lunch Program, that's still 5 times the number of students as the students in Appleton. Now, that 60% doesn't include kids who get lunch without qualifying for free or reduced lunch, but also doesn't mean that more than 60% of students on a given day are going to be getting lunch. My point still stands, however, that is a lot of lunches. Cooking at a much larger scale would provide a larger issue, as they now need more people working longer in order to cook for the number of students typical of a public high school. The menu at Appleton isn't perfect either. Why are high school students getting energy drinks at school lunches? Even if that listing is a mistake and they're actually talking about sports drinks, those are still loaded with sugar. They also serve low-fat cookies, which probably just means that they're filled with even more sugar to make them taste like, good. Look, I want better school lunches, but this whole segment makes it seem like schools are putting revenue over students. But the reason for that is the federal government doesn't subsidize school lunches well enough. This makes it seem like the main problem is lazy school staff members, when in reality it's because of politicians who don't think that the nutrition and health of children in this country is important. When you need to feed a large amount of students daily, cooking from scratch is nearly impossible, especially with a small and underpaid staff. Spurlock then goes to Texas on day 13. He talks to the VP of the GMA, a lobby group for a variety of food corporations, and this man immediately pivots the focus to a lack of exercise in school. That's pretty much what I expected. Spurlock does, however, bring up that only one state has mandatory physical education for grades K through 12, that being Illinois. In a Massachusetts elementary school, kids only have 1 PE class per week for 45 minutes, and it's not like many schools do better. When No Child Left Behind was instated by George W. Bush, many schools cut recess and PE to meet education requirements. No Child Left Behind was also famously hated by both students and teachers, adding to yet another reason why that child from before committed heresy. Spurlock then goes into what a calorie is, mainly because most people don't know what it actually is. A food calorie, or big calorie, or kilocalorie, is the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 liter of water 1 degree Celsius. If you're confused about it being a liter instead of a gram, that's because there's also little calories, also called calories, where that is the definition. As the name kilocalorie suggests, a big calorie is made up of 1,000 little calories. Why doesn't the US put kilocalorie on its packages instead of just calories to clear up this distinction when other countries do? I have no clue. It just adds to the confusion. Spurlock then gets into an argument with his vegan girlfriend, and to get back at him, I guess, she tells the camera that since the start of the experiment, he's been tired and is worse at sex. She blames his new issues with erectile dysfunction on the amount of saturated fats he's been eating, and there is evidence that shows that those who eat diets low in saturated fat are less likely to develop erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction can also be caused by other things like sleep disorders or, well, alcoholism. We'll get back to that later. Day 18, Spurlock talks to his nutritionist again. We finally get someone talking about refined carbs, which I think is odd because, he's eating a lot of them. A ton of them. He also lost a pound, which his nutritionist thinks is likely due to loss of muscle mass rather than him losing body fat. Spurlock then goes to his general practitioner, who mentions that his cholesterol went from 165 to 225. He also mentions that his liver is inflamed, likely due to a fatty liver. His assessment is based on some of his liver enzymes, SGOT and SGPT, with the former initially being 21 and is now 130. The latter was 20 and is now 290. His doctor tells him that he's never seen anything like this before from a high-fat diet. This is the type of thing that usually happens to alcoholics. Foreshadowing is no, that joke's been too overdone at this point. Dang it. We then go to a segment that's a cut between an interview and a talk with Spurlock's gastroenterologist. The doctor, Neil Bernard, a doctor who talks about the addictive properties of food, mainly that naloxone can be used to affect people addicted to certain foods. Afterwards, Spurlock talks to his doctor, who mentions that he's likely getting addicted to his food. He then mentions how people who eat McDonald's once a week are called heavy users by the company, with 72% of the people who eat there being heavy users, while those who eat more than 2 times a week are called super heavy users. This leads back to Bernard, who mentions how McDonald's food has various addictive properties, from cheese having casomorphins, which are opioid peptides, although it's unknown if these actually leave the digestive system and affect the brain, and even if they do, they're not nearly as potent as other opioids. Bernard does, however, add that they also serve food with sodas, which have a ton of sugar, which can be addictive, and caffeine, which absolutely is addictive. Thus, it's easy for people to crave McDonald's, especially if they begin eating it at a young age. We then cut to a French ad where nutritionists say you shouldn't go to McDonald's more than once a week, and how McDonald's got mad and said that its food can be part of a healthy diet. And then Spurlock calls a bunch of nutritionists who turned out to not like McDonald's very much. This whole segment felt pointless. The documentary itself acknowledged that we know fast food is bad for you. We don't need you to call a bunch of nutritionists to refute a claim that McDonald's made because it could negatively affect sales. Spurlock then gets a second blood test, along with a call telling him that the health center he was going to throughout the documentary is being closed down. This leads into talks about how we spend more on weight loss products than on nutrition and health, how some people who can't seem to lose weight go to gastric bypass surgery. Spurlock interviews a dude who's about to undergo the process because he went blind for a week as a result of his diabetes and is hoping the surgery will give him a better quality of life. He also apparently drank 1.5 to 2 gallons of soda a day. Holy crap. They also then cut to actual footage of the surgery happening, including shots of the patient's insides, likely to deliberately gross out the audience into eating less. Still don't think it was necessary, but you do you, Morgan. Day 21 comes around and Spurlock wakes up at night having trouble breathing and felt like he was having heart palpitations. It was so bad that he temporarily faded out of existence.
Change the world. My final message. Goodbye.
He then goes back to his general practitioner, who doesn't really know how to explain Spurlock's chest pain, but does recommend taking aspirin for it, something that Spurlock seems super hesitant about for some reason. His doctor then goes over how uric acid has been elevated, which can lead to gout and kidney stones. He also makes a comment on the atrocious state of his liver, once again explaining how he never thought you could do this with a high-fat diet, and telling him to please stop, and it is the same thing he would say to an alcoholic in this state. He then talks to his girlfriend, who tells him how she never expected this experiment to be this dangerous and how Spurlock didn't think it would be either. Now, it may seem weird that his doctor has never seen anything like this, since obesity can lead to fatty liver disease, something that was mentioned before, but in this case it's different due to the degree to which his liver is going bad. Sure, poor diet in the long run can hurt it, but the previous guy talking about adolescents with scarred livers talks about it like it will lead to future complications and transplants decades down the line. His doctor is mainly saying how he's never seen someone damage their liver in such a short amount of time with any food or beverage other than alcohol, which is odd to him. Spurlock then talks about the influence that the food industry has in the government, including the GMA. They cut to the interview with the GMA, who says that they are both part of the problem and part of the solution. Sure about the latter there, buddy? Spurlock then tries to get an interview with the CEO of McDonald's, Jim Cantalupo, and fails. Keeps trying to call him to get it, and he never does. He then cuts to what I guess is a family who keeps failing to say the Pledge of Allegiance by heart, but one of the adults there is able to say the Big Mac slogan by heart. This, I guess, is here to show the influence that marketing has on us, but most grown adults in the US don't say the Pledge of Allegiance a lot. Once you go outside of school, you really don't hear it anywhere. I also don't know how many people they asked this question, because the Big Mac slogan is from the 1970s, so I think there's a lot of young people who would have been able to get it right. It then cuts to Spurlock eating somewhere, and then a fat guy comes into frame to use the microwave, and when he leaves, Spurlock just gives the camera a look. Did you just put this in here and make fun of a fat dude, Morgan? Is the third salad of the month making you feel like you're so much better than him? Soon after, it cuts to Spurlock on day 27 eating a really big meal with a burger, fries, soda, what I assume is a coffee based on all the creamer, a hot fudge sundae, and what I think is an apple pie based on the box. I assume he got the large fries and drink based on the fry container not looking like the medium and having what looks to be an LA on it as in large. I can't make out the name of the burger on the packaging, but it looks like the first letter could be a Q. It definitely doesn't look like a B. Plus, in previous shots, we see that the quarter pounder is usually yellow in color on its packaging, so we'll say it's a quarter pounder considering how much Spurlock seems to love those. I'll also be generous and say that he didn't get the double this time. So, assuming the large soda is a Coke, this meal comes out to 1,945 calories. And if he adds 2 of those creamers to the coffee, that's an extra 40 calories. I know you're trying to show how bad the food is, Morgan, but is this much necessary? This is one meal. No wonder you're up to 5,000 calories a day. Did you need 2 desserts? Most people don't even get 1. Now, of course, this health information is for the modern items that Spurlock is eating, and it has been 20 years since then, so it's possible that the number of calories has changed, but they're still likely very similar amounts. Spurlock then continues to fail to get an interview with the McDonald's CEO, followed by him having a hard time going up the stairs. On day 30, Spurlock's girlfriend makes him a detox diet with many cleansing vegetables. I don't know what a cleansing vegetable is. Vegetables are vegetables. Spurlock then throws a party at McDonald's to celebrate the end of this wild challenge. He even invites his nutritionist and one of the health experts he interviewed. He then takes one last blood test and weigh-in. His final weight is 210 pounds, gaining 8 pounds in the last week. Afterwards, he once again can't talk to anyone at McDonald's, making him a little bit upset.
You'll not talk to anybody, and you'll like it that way.
At the end of the documentary, Spurlock mentions how the judge dismissed the lawsuit brought about by the 2 teenagers, as they failed to show how eating McDonald's was the direct cause of their weight gain. Spurlock then goes over the results of his experiment. He gained 24.5 pounds, which is actually pretty interesting. You need about 3,500 excess calories to gain a pound, so if we do a bit of math, we know that Spurlock ate double the amount of recommended calories for his height and weight, putting him at 150,000 calories over 30 days, or 75,000 excess calories. If we divide that by 3,500, we see that Spurlock should have gained about 21.43 pounds at the end of the 30 days. Why did he gain 3 extra pounds? It could be just because, everybody's body is different. Some people are prone to gaining more weight than others due to metabolism and other factors, but we'll see in a bit that those 3 extra pounds were likely from another source. In addition to the weight gain, Spurlock's liver went to crap and his cholesterol went up to 230. His body fat percentage went up 7% and he felt terrible and got both normal depression and dick depression. He felt addicted to the food and his doctors are not very optimistic of a total recovery. We then see his gastroenterologist bring up how a lot of his results are similar to what you would see due to an alcohol binge. I wonder why this keeps getting brought up. Okay, I'm gonna stop being vague. Hell, you probably already knew this. Morgan Spurlock was an alcoholic. Spurlock admitted that he had issues with alcoholism for decades, saying he hadn't been without it for more than a week during that time. This means that he lied to his doctors at the beginning of the documentary. This explains a lot. Where did the 3 extra pounds come from? Was it his metabolism, or was it from alcohol consumption? His liver getting utterly obliterated was almost certainly due to his drinking, as his doctors were pretty surprised that it even happened. His insistence on not taking aspirin for the pain he felt in his chest was likely because he knew that taking aspirin while consistently drinking alcohol is pretty dangerous. Other symptoms like depression, headaches, and erectile dysfunction could be caused by his diet, but they could have also been due to his drinking. This makes nearly everything in this documentary kinda worthless, because he added a giant confounding variable to the whole thing. It's frankly pretty sad that this is the thing that made Spurlock famous, the thing that children across the country saw, possibly multiple times while in school, and because of this big struggle he had, it turned out to be completely misleading. But we've already gone through most of the film, so let's just see what the final few minutes have in store for us. Spurlock goes on about how there have been more health-conscious changes in schools recently, and that McDonald's has introduced salads that really aren't that much better for you than a Big Mac, as well as the fact that they introduced the McGriddle, which looks like a health abomination. Spurlock then goes over how he ate about a pound of sugar per day eating McDonald's food, although it's more likely he drank most of that concerning all the large sodas he slurped down. He then brings up a point that a lot of his critics still bring up to this day about the film. Of course you're gonna get fat eating fast food. You ate it 3 times a day, to which Spurlock counters that people do eat this kind of food on a regular and sometimes daily basis. He then says that the experiment was a bit extreme, but not that crazy. I disagree with this. The amount of food Spurlock ate during the filming of the experiment is odd. Most people don't eat nearly 5,000 calories a day, and like I mentioned earlier, Spurlock seemed to consistently go for really big items like the double quarter pounder with cheese. You could argue that Spurlock was doing this to kind of speedrun the issues you get from constantly eating fast food over a long period of time, but frankly that's not a great argument. If you're going to argue that fast food makes you feel like crap, you should probably be doing so with an amount of calories that most people realistically consume every day, or else people are just going to say that you feel like trash because you're eating a ridiculous amount of food. You can't even make this argument when it comes to preservatives, because even people who eat processed foods or fast food every day aren't exposed to them to the same degree that you are when you're eating this much, which is important as how you feel with potentially toxic compounds is dose dependent. It's not even a great decision for a sensationalist documentary because the peak negative effects Spurlock's encountered are mainly in the first half of the film, with the rest of it being more of the same. I feel like the film would have been a lot better if he was eating something like 3,500 or even 4,000 calories instead. Something that people would see as large, but still reasonably possible given the source of the calories. Or at least it would have been if the director wasn't an alcoholic. Turns out the pain in Spurlock's chest was due to the weight of his sins. We then get a where are they now montage, or I guess a where were they 20 years ago montage at this point, with various people who Spurlock met and interviewed throughout the film. In the end, Morgan was asked to supersize his meals 9 times, 5 of which were in Texas. The VHS version of the film also has various bonus features, such as an old couple that collects McDonald's merchandise, and Spurlock putting a bunch of fast food in jars, and only the McDonald's fries just continuing to persist as if nothing happened for 10 weeks. Some of these bonus features include deleted scenes, such as an interview with a woman named Molly Kennedy who underwent laparoscopic surgery due to medical issues, and how to change her lifestyle. Laparoscopic surgery is when an operation is done on a patient using small incisions and a camera is used to diagnose problems and, see what's going on in there. She never mentions what it was for, though, which likely contributed to it being a deleted scene. I'm not going to go over the rest of these scenes, as they would likely just be summaries and wouldn't really have too much of note. That is Supersize Me, and because of the lack of knowledge of Spurlock's drinking issues, the impact of it was wild. There was news coverage, documentaries that were inspired by Supersize Me, like Forks Over Knives and Super High Me. Just as the end of the documentary states, and as I mentioned previously, 6 weeks after the film premiered at a movie festival, McDonald's got rid of the supersized portions at their restaurant, a change which the film hints at being related, despite McDonald's denying it. Realistically, it probably wasn't the only factor that led to them getting rid of it. The dismissal of their lawsuit probably led them to try and seem healthier to prevent future legal action, but I really can't deny that it was probably a big factor. And the fact that the documentary mentions the lawsuit bringing it back into the public consciousness solidifies this further. Even if not the sole factor, it's still a massive deal, and the movie made $11.5 million domestically and an additional $10.7 million at the international box office, which is pretty crazy since the film only had a budget of $65,000. It had great reviews from many critics, including Roger Ebert, and a few of the reviews of the film were less enthusiastic, even at the time. Robert Davis found the film to be more of a publicity stunt than a documentary. He cites the rules of the film, making it hard to understand what the goal is, and also criticized the amount Spurlock ate. In fact, this review also wonders if this was to speed up the health effects of a normal American diet, which is nice to see, considering that I wrote my previous statement before reading Davis's article, so it's good to see I'm not alone in thinking that. Years later, John Cisna, a teacher who lost 60 pounds while on a diet of exclusively McDonald's for half a year, criticized the documentary by saying that it was basically meaningless. A guy eats uncontrollable amounts of food, stops exercising, and the whole world is surprised he puts on weight? But I think he's kind of misunderstanding the intent of the experiment. Everyone knew that eating junk food at the time was bad, but people weren't really talking about the specific health issues caused by a diet filled with fast food, at least non-health experts. The point wasn't to show that he could get fat, that was a given. The point was to show that doing so would hurt other aspects of his health, something that a lot of Americans would be able to see firsthand in any short amount of time. They would see the specific health problems he had as a direct result of his diet. Most people gain weight gradually, they eat more and more, and that makes them gain weight slowly. Because of this, they don't really notice the health problems that they get because most of them don't become noticeable until well after their eating habits have changed. Now, I obviously don't completely disagree with this statement. I made myself pretty clear in that, but this statement strikes me as something he would have said even if the documentary was, better, and Spurlock ate a more reasonable calorie count that still allowed him to gain weight. Probably the biggest critic of Supersize Me was a comedian by the name of Tom Nodden, who made a counter-documentary called Fathead. Initially, I was just going to watch Fathead and give a pretty brief overview of it, just talking a bit about the points it brings up and whether or not I agree with the criticisms mentioned without going too deep into it. However, upon watching the documentary, I realized that although the documentary has a few good points, it also has a ton of issues, especially with how it presents the good points that it makes. Because the film is incredibly, and I mean incredibly biased. Later on, it goes to talk about diet with some highly contested information. So, looking at this documentary, we'll have to wait for another time. Years after Supersize Me came out, Morgan Spurlock released a sequel documentary to Supersize Me, Supersize Me 2 Holy Chicken, released in 2017. I'm just going to talk about it as a basic overview, as if you want to see the film yourself, you can actually just watch it for free on YouTube with ads in glorious 480p. Really, Morgan? I should reiterate, this film came out in 2017. Aside from that, the film actually does a pretty good job looking into the ways fast food companies haven't really changed much since the times of Supersize Me, using language like crispy instead of fried for chicken sandwiches, filling their restaurants with ads for healthy options to make everything seem healthier when really everything is the same. Spurlock learns this information as he tries opening up his own chicken restaurant where he meets with marketers and food scientists to find out what makes a chicken sandwich sell well. This does lead to him eating a bunch of fast food, but that's not the main focus. He's doing it to see what the competition is like. He goes to Chick-fil-A as part of his mission, where afterwards he calls them out for being homophobic, but dude, you gave them your money. Could have just asked for like an ingredients list. You know that their chicken sandwiches sell well. You didn't have to financially support them. You're not in like some weird food desert. Anyways, the real meat of the documentary, however, involves Spurlock opening his own chicken restaurant, where he finds out firsthand how difficult it is to be a chicken farmer due to the level of control that the big 5 chicken companies have on all levels of production. He finds out that chickens don't really need to be out in the field to be considered free range, and that a bunch of other buzzwords that you see on packaging mean basically nothing. He finds out that chickens have severe health problems due to growing so quickly in the only 6 weeks it takes for them to be ready for slaughter. Big chicken doesn't just hurt their own livestock, however. They also screw over their farmers, basically keeping them in debt so they're under the thumbs of the companies who provide them the birds. Overall, the film is actually good, dare I say. The information is accurate from what I could find, and even if you don't care about the whole deep dive into marketing, it still gives you some pretty good information about the state of the chicken industry. The biggest piece of criticism you can have about it is that it kind of feels like Spurlock made 2 different documentaries, one about deceptive fast food advertising, and one about the chicken industry, and then he just kind of jammed them together. But I kind of see it as Spurlock initially envisioning the film to be about the former, only to realize the crap that goes down in the latter, and feel like he has a duty to share that with the public, especially since it's relevant information for his end goal of opening up an extremely transparent fast food chicken restaurant. Despite being a much better documentary than the first film, this one is not nearly as popular. Part of that is probably because it's not as relevant to health classes, but there's also a much bigger reason why that's the case. Content warning for the next section for mentions of sexual harassment and grape without the G, which I have to use because YouTube is an unserious website. If this content is upsetting to you, or you just don't want to hear me have to speak using vague, non-offensive language for this sensitive topic, skip to the next section of the video. During December 2017, when the Me Too movement was going on, Spurlock was outed for sexual misconduct. By whom, you may ask? Himself. Yeah, when the Me Too movement began picking up steam, I guess Morgan was worried about being outed, so he decided to get ahead of it to limit the damage. He posted a twitlonger which laid out the 2 instances in which he engaged in sexual misconduct. The first is when he was in college and was drinking with a girl, and in his words, they began fooling around. After which she pushed him off of her. They talked more, began fooling around more, and undressed, but she said she didn't want to go further. They laid in bed together and started kissing, and then they began to have sex. Soon into it, she said light bright, to which Spurlock replied, "What?" And she responded, "Light bright, that kid's toy. That's all I can see and think about," before she started crying. They stopped, and Spurlock states that he tried to comfort her, but she believed that she had been violated. He also mentions how he would pay a settlement to his assistant for sexual harassment around 2009, when he would continuously yell hot pants or sex pants at her when across the office from her. Now, these instances are from Spurlock's point of view. We don't know if these instances are worse than what he's describing in order to make himself look better compared to what the victims might say if they came forward, especially in the former case. We aren't sure since they never did come forward, and we don't know if Spurlock outing himself actually contributed to that. In the twitlonger, Spurlock questions why he was always unfaithful to his wives and girlfriends in the past, and if it was something that had to do with his ego, or the sexual abuse he went through when he was a child and again as a teenager, or the fact that his dad left his mom and him when he was a child. None of the aforementioned reasons are excuses for actions that he's done, and he seems to somewhat recognize that as he mentions that they don't matter when you're making someone else feel like less than a person. It is also in this post that he revealed that he had been drinking since he was 13 and had never been sober for more than a week in 30 years, which is something that we mentioned previously. With all that out in the air, people obviously weren't too kind to Spurlock, and I don't blame him. The same month he admitted to all of this, YouTube Red dropped Supersize Me 2 after they had bought the distribution rights for $3.5 million only a month and a half earlier. Samuel Goldwyn Films later distributed it on September 2019. Eventually, the documentary would end up back on YouTube. After admitting to his sexual misconduct, Spurlock's career was over. He made no more documentaries before his death on May 23, 2024, when Spurlock died due to complications from cancer. That has been the end of Supersize Me, a documentary that has been so influential and yet so wrong. I guess it just goes to show you that just because something is popular doesn't mean that it's good. It does, however, show the need for integrity, especially when it comes to things like human health. Misinformation like the stuff brought about in Supersize Me hurts people, even if it's misinfo about food that we know is bad for us. It also leads to a lot of disingenuous and biased counterclaims by those who use these missteps as a way to preach their agenda to the public. That's why next time, I'm going to be looking into the counter documentary to Supersize Me, Fathead, looking at all the stuff it has to say. So stay tuned for that. Try and have a nice day. Goodbye.